collect taxes. You could also be helped if you have unfiled returns, a tax lien, wage garnishment, bank levy, or if you have entered into a payment plan and can't make the payments. It's your hard-earned money. Stop Uncle Sam right now. Make the call that could help you end the worry today. *1234. That's *1234. *1234.
By calling *1234, you agree to receive SMS or MMS text messaging. Standard rates may apply. You also waive any registration to state, federal, or corporate do not call registry.
1010 WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM HD3 Baltimore. The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Hello, hello, hello. My name is Ivan Bates. I will be your host today. We have an absolutely amazing program for Tell the Truth Tuesday. We'll have our sister here, Miss Kelly Davis. But joining me, with me being the host today, I get to say this, joining me to the right is my man, Mr. Politics himself, a.k.a. Hassan. How you doing today, my brother?
I'm just right. How you doing?
I'm good. I like
sick.
this seat. I don't want you to be sick, but I do like this seat. I don't like it that much, though. And to the left, we have the boss of the bosses, my man who needs no introduction. How you doing, Mark?
How you doing, sir? Good to see you in the big chair.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. So, we got an amazing show. It's going to be on and popping. We want everybody to call in. We're really going to talk about Tell the Truth Tuesday. We're going to talk about a case involving Mr. Keith Davis. He's a person I view as a quote-unquote a prisoner who should not be incarcerated. A young man who was shot by the Baltimore City Police. They've lied, they've cheated, they've stolen. They've done everything they can to put this young man in jail. So we're going to bring light to what's going on in the criminal justice system in Baltimore City. But first of all, we want to hear from my man Hassan.
So we definitely want to let you know that this program is brought to you by none other than that powerhouse union known as SEIU 500, who is working hard to get progressives elected all across this country, right here, especially in the city and across the state of Maryland as well. They want Together We Rise is not just a slogan, but it's a blueprint for the future of the union movement and for this country. To learn more about the union, its mission, the candidates that they are excited about that's on the ballot this November, go to www.seiu500.org. And somebody called me last night talking about they were the only third-party Green Party candidate to ever be endorsed by SEIU. So they thought that was a fabulous article that I may have to get into later on in the week. Speaking of which, today is the final day to be able to go out and register to vote for the upcoming general election, which takes place in 3 weeks from today on November. You make sure that you are registered to vote. If you're not, you have up until 9 p.m. this evening, and Radio 1 is doing its part, because we are down right now helping register voters as we speak at Mondawmin Mall. So make your way on down to Mondawmin. If you're not registered, if you need to change your address real quick or your party affiliation, get down there. CLY, JJ and the crew, Doc Cheatham and NAACP and others are right down there right today registering to vote. I think we're down there till later this evening, but 9 o'clock is definitely the deadline. They're down there till 8 p.m. because they got to have time to take those registrations from Mondawmin and get them downtown to the Board of Elections. Now, what I don't understand, y'all, is how you have a voter registration deadline, right? But now you have same-day voter registration for early voting. So to me, that makes absolutely no sense to have a deadline if essentially you can register to vote during early voting.
Well, that's my pet peeve, is that a lot of us have done a lot of work to get you to be able to same day register and vote during early vote. And so when you run around and tell people this is the last day, this is the deadline, there are people that are going to miss that deadline that are then not going to get the information that they can still go and vote anyway. And so I understand why there needs to be one deadline for when you can do it online and stuff like that. Like, I get all of that. But the messaging, we got to work on this messaging, because there are folks that will think they missed the deadline and go away that we will never reach again to get them back for early vote. So if we've got same-day voting during early vote, then let that be the message right along with it. On Facebook, electeds are saying, you got to register. This is the last day. This is your last chance to register. No, it is not. And we need to stop saying that. A lot of us worked really hard to get this passed.
Absolutely. And shout out to my sheroes, Nicole Mondell, Catalina Bird, both of whom have been down at Central Booking over the past few days, helping the inmates register who are eligible voters awaiting trial. They've been helping them not only register to vote, but also to get absentee ballot applications to get them mailed into the board and get their information back to them. Because if you are eligible as long as you're waiting. And Latoya Francis Williams, who will be with us in the studio today, was our defense counsel when we sued the city board and the state board of elections 2 years ago. Matter of fact, when we contended that the board was not doing enough to allow eligible voters, and that's those who are detained, who have not been convicted of a felony charge, and those who are convicted of misdemeanors, who are in, pretrial detention and things, who are still eligible to vote. They should be able to register to vote and have access to their absentee ballots. Big ups to Nicole and Catalina. I know Nicole's group, Out for Justice, is doing a big thing. Go to www.felonyvote.com. www.felonyvote.com. You'll see what they're doing on behalf of ex-felons across this state. But right now, when it comes to the right to vote.
That's amazing work, amazing work. When I heard Cat was down Central Booking, I got nervous. But okay, all is well.
People need to recognize and realize that makes a difference. I actually had a case down in New Orleans where I argued, where there was a man who was down in Mississippi and Hattiesburg. He was in charge of the local jail. And he registered the inmates so that they could vote in the election. While his buddy was running for mayor of Hattiesburg. He was black, against the Tea Party candidate, and his buddy won by about 15 or 20 votes. They registered 150 inmates. Now, that shows you what the power of voting can do. So it doesn't matter if you were inside or outside. They were able to register them, get them absentee ballots, and they voted, and his buddy won. And they had an African-American mayor.
Absolutely. But they came after him, too, didn't they?
Yeah, they came after. The feds came after him, and then they end up calling me. So I had to go down to New Orleans to help the brother. So, yeah, but, sometimes you have to make a stand. You got to make a stand.
Absolutely. And that was our whole point and premise when we were, arguing the fact the board would say, oh, well, it's up to them to do that. But the problem is a person who is home, you are afforded every opportunity, right? You can go to early voting sites and register to vote. We were making the argument you can't do that in prison. Now, mind you, you have a certain circumstance, but you are still eligible. So you should still have that opportunity to be able to go somewhere to get that absentee ballot, to be able to register to vote. We would argue, and we took the argument so far as to say that you should have ballot machines within the larger prison systems, just like you would do at a senior center, just like you would do at any other location. University and colleges is one argument we made for years with Doc Cheatham. I know for the past 15 years. Put it at Morgan, put it at Coppin. It makes sense. There's a large block of voters there.
Absolutely.
Put a voting precinct right there. It just makes it. Well, the same thing would apply to Central Booking, the penitentiary down, places where large amounts or large blocks of voters, potential voters, and of course, the Board of Elections does not want to do that.
No.
Hey, gentlemen, speaking, we just talked somebody up. One very.
Hey, Nicole.
What's that?
Nicole.
Hey, so thanks for having me. I just wanted to report from on the ground what Out for Justice is doing. Also, collaborating with Miss Catalina Bird. We have been registering voters at probation and parole sites around the city, and also have been partnering with the Prince George's County NAACP and Life After Release. We have folks registering voters at those probation and parole sites in Prince George's County. We're also been in the local detention center for the last 2 days registering voters. Those men and women are excited about having the opportunity to vote. As Hassan said, the absentee ballot is so important. So what we were able to do was have the voter registration form, the absentee ballot form, and also the designation as absentee ballot, which means that I or Catalina will be dropping off their forms, picking up their ballots. I'm actually right here at Board of Elections right now, picking up the first round of absentee ballots from our incarcerated citizens from early this morning. And Hassan, you're right. I asked Mr. Armstrong. I said, we need a poll site in the local detention center. So I said, is that something that you would oppose? And he said, absolutely. And I said, well, why? We have over 40,000 individuals who are eligible to vote, and it is the law that Board of Elections is supposed to get individuals who are eligible to vote. They're supposed to have access to the ballot. And he said, well, Nicole, the reality is that we don't have the money in the budget. And we have to rely on volunteers like you to get behind those walls. And so...
And I'm going to tell you something. Nicole. And I'm going to tell you where he's wrong with that. And I want people to understand this, right? For whatever you want to think about Doc Cheatham. Doc Cheatham, when he was down at that board, they didn't have the elaborate amount of money you do need to do education. But Doc Cheatham packed that little machine in his little car or his van, and he would travel to community association meetings. He would go to senior centers. He would make sure everybody and anybody who asked, and those who didn't, knew what those new Diebold machines meant, because back then we were just getting those new technology machines. So he wanted to make sure everybody knew how to use them. That's something that has not happened since Doc Cheatham left there. This administration has decided to do absolutely nothing and feel like, you know what, we're going to sit back, kick back, and just worry about the elections. And they screw that up every time, as we can see.
That's exactly the attitude right now from Mr. Armstrong. Personally, I like him, but professionally, he could be a lot more innovative, and he could be doing a lot more to make sure that our incarcerated citizens have access to the ballot. And so thankfully, we have this new warden down there at the Baltimore City Detention Center. He's straight from Philadelphia, and he even said he thought that we were doing this all along. He's from Philly, and they do this. This is normal for them to make sure that folks are registered to vote and have access to the absentee ballot. And so the young lady at the Board of Elections was trying to give me problems because of these designation forms, and she said, well, why are you down here picking them up for them? They can just mail it. And I said, you clearly don't understand what the barriers are for individuals that are incarcerated, especially the ones in pretrial. They have not had access to get money from their family members or anything. So they don't have money for things as simple as a stamp, ma'am.
Yeah. More importantly, why is she second guessing someone who's trying to expand the franchise legally? That's part of the problem down there.
Because I'm working them. They have to now process almost 70 applications right now as we speak. They didn't want to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I got in a lot of trouble last week because I called that administration a dumpster fire down there, but I don't care. It's a dumpster fire.
Yep. Well, look, Nicole, just wanted to thank you so much for calling. We're going to go ahead and hit the show today for the work that you're doing for all the brothers and sisters that are incarcerated and having their voice heard.
No problem. It is. Right. I am. This is what my life work is about, and I'm honored to be doing this.
All right. You have a good one.
And again, www.felonyvote.com is where you can find out that information, and outforjustice.org.
So the purpose of our show today is Tell the Day. Now, Now, I want to take credit for this guest here being here because I'm very involved in the criminal justice system. I'm a very big advocate for the criminal justice system when I see something wrong, making it right. Now, we do know that some people aren't doing right and they have to be held accountable, but the criminal justice system needs to make sure it works correctly for everybody. I came across a sister who was standing out, yelling, screaming when I first saw her for her husband. Kind of caught my attention, and I listened to what she had to say. She was fighting for her husband, a young man named Keith Davis. Now, some of you may know the story, may not know the story. I don't want to do the story injustice. I will allow her, Miss Kelly Davis, to tell the story. But what's important is that this is a story that needs to be told. Because in Baltimore City, things aren't working within our criminal justice system. People need to understand that, and people need to understand what the criminal justice system, what it does to black people, not just in North or South Carolina or Alabama, but what's happening here in Baltimore City. This is a case that's near and dear to my heart because this is a case that I see a sister trying every single day to just have her husband come home to his family. And isn't that what we want? So without no ado, I would like to welcome to our studio today, Miss Kelly Davis.
Hello. Thank
hello.
You so
Hello.
much
Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
I just talked a little about it. Why don't you tell the listeners to what the story of Keith Davis is?
Okay, so June 7th, 2015, my husband, Keith Davis Jr., was shot at over 44 times by 4 Baltimore City police officers. He was hit 3 times. And he would go on to subsequently be charged with over 21 charges in one case. He would sit for 2 his neck from being shot without medical attention, without medical treatment. He was denied a bail. In fact, one judge, Judge Christopher Panos, he's an amazing judge, he ordered the state to have Keith seen by medical doctors because he felt like, since you are so adamant on keeping this man in jail, you need to provide adequate medical care. We would go on to have one trial where the witness or the victim who gave a description when this first happened looked at Keith and said, that's not him. And then we would go on to have, out of those 21 charges, 15 is what ended up being indicted with. Out of those 16 charges, he was acquitted of 15. The one lone charge that he was found guilty of was added 5 months later. And my theory is that after they finally talked to officers, because Marilyn Mosby, Baltimore City State's attorney, cleared all 4 officers without speaking with them.
Okay, so let's back up. So these officers shot at your husband and shot your husband 44 times in 2015, June of 2015, right after Freddie Gray, correct?
Yes, he was the first man shot after... no, there was actually DeJuan Hawkins. He was the first one shot after Freddie Gray. So
after your husband shot, the state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, did an investigation and cleared these officers and said it was okay?
How you do an investigation without speaking to officers, I'm not sure. Officers were not spoken to, but an investigation allegedly was done, and officers were cleared in November of 2015.
So Marilyn Mosby's office cleared these officers and said they didn't do anything wrong without ever speaking to them.
Without ever speaking to them.
Okay.
We know that because one of the officers, when we were going forward to trial, Keith's attorney at the time, the amazing Miss Latoya Francis Williams, she, sent subpoenas out to talk to these officers. And one called and was like, hey, what are you looking for me for? And she's like, you were involved in a police-involved shooting. Like, what's going on? And he's like, I didn't know I was being investigated. I didn't know anything was wrong. We were cleared.
Okay.
But they never gave a statement.
So they don't give a statement, you have a trial, and you say out of this.
They gave a statement 6 months after the shooting.
Okay.
So Keith went on trial in February 2016. They gave a statement January 2016.
And he's found guilty of 1 count, felon in possession of a handgun, correct?
Right. And he was found not guilty of possession of handgun, wear, carry, transport. But it was a charge of, I believe it was like constructive.
Well, yeah, felon in possession, right. Just so, the listeners understand, the law states that if you have a prior felony and you're around a handgun at any point in time, that you can be convicted of felon in possession of a handgun. Felony, any type of felony, possession of intent to distribute, and you're in a room and there's a gun underneath a couch, then you could technically be found guilty. And that's the count he was found guilty of,
and that's
correct?
what's important, because juries hear a prohibited person, and I believe that they only go to, oh, you've had a gun before, or you've had a gun, and that's not the case. It could be any felony. But yes, that charge was added 5 months later, I believe, once all of the preliminary stuff was done surrounding this gun and the fact that this gun was never fired.
But they found him not guilty of possession of a handgun, correct?
Of possessing.
So it's clear that the jury was like, oh, there was a gun in the room, you just happened to be there. Right. That's what it was about.
In closing argument, the prosecutor, her exact words were, no matter what you understood from this day, he is guilty. You don't have to deliberate on this count. He is guilty of being unlawful possession with a felony conviction. And I believe that the jury, absolutely, I could see them being in that room saying, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't do this. Well, she said he's guilty. We don't have to deliberate on that. And I absolutely believe that that's what happened.
Well, I guess if that wasn't enough, then way after this trial, all of a sudden he's charged with murder.
He's then charged with first-degree murder. They are claiming that this gun that was found inside of a garage, not on Keith, he was found not guilty of ever possessing this gun, carrying this gun. This gun was found atop of a refrigerator in a garage that he has no connection to. They're saying that the gun was used in a homicide hours before the police shot him, so they charge him with first-degree murder.
Even knowing that they saw people running out the garage and everything.
Yes.
So other people are in the garage, not Keith's garage, but he's charged with murder.
Yes.
So the first trial was when?
February 2016.
And that trial resulted in a hung jury, I think 11.
Oh, no, the first murder trial?
The first murder trial.
The first murder trial was May of 2016.
So he's been shot 2015. Mm-hmm. Okay, he has the gun charge.
Yes.
Now he has the murder charge. Uh-huh. And he's found guilty. He goes to trial on the murder charge.
Yes.
And that was in May of 2016.
May of 2016.
So did he get time for the gun?
He got a mandatory minimum of 5 years.
Okay, so that started then?
That started from June, so I guess it started from the day he was arrested. Yes. Okay. So his time is actually up. He is doing what's called dead time. Mm-hmm. He has been released from that charge. He's just sitting in jail fighting this ridiculous case.
So he has the murder trial in May,
yes.
And it's LaToya Francis Williams.
Yes.
Hello, welcome. You were Keith's lawyer for that first trial, correct?
That is correct.
And that trial was in front of whom?
Judge Barry Williams.
Hit fine.
And the trial was in front of Judge Barry. No, the murder trial.
The murder trial was in front of Judge Alfred Nance.
Okay, and who was the state's attorney?
Andrew Mason.
Okay, but it's a different state's attorney than the first trial.
Yes, a different state's attorney than the first trial.
And what happened with the first murder trial?
Well, as I know you guys just discussed very briefly, it was a debacle, if you'd say, at the very least. No matter how the state tried to make it fit, the jury certainly came back hung, to my disappointment. I did have an opportunity to speak with at least 4 jurors that, and you may be surprised to know, reached out to me.
Me too, as well. Yeah.
I've never had this before in a homicide case where the jurors felt so upset by the state's presentation and were so convinced of a man's innocence, not just not guilty, innocence, that they individually reached out to me. Wow. And expressed their concern. In fact, one, if you may recall, said, I will avail myself to anything that you need because I'm so put off. And quite candidly, they were very clear that the one juror that refused to vote not guilty was just upset at the way I spoke to one of the testifying officers. Okay. I flat out called him a liar.
Okay. So it was 11, because a jury trial has to be 12. Unanimous verdict, all 12 must find you guilty or not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt,
That's correct.
So 11 said not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
And one person was just officer.
That's correct.
Wow. So does the state does Marilyn Mosby's office dismiss the charges?
No, unfortunately.
We couldn't even get out the courthouse before a statement was released.
statement.
We will be relentless in our pursuit of justice, and we will be recharging Mr. Keith Davis Jr.
It was almost like it was personal.
It is personal.
Okay.
So now, Ivan, you're a former prosecutor. Answer for me. Do you guys take into account when a jury is hung what the vote count was? Like if it was 11-1 for a conviction, then you might say, well, let's go again. But if it's 11-1 for acquittal, it seems to me like you would say, well, we don't have a case.
Yes.
Seems you would.
Everybody does that. Across the board, 11-1, not guilty, says let it go. But, so there's a second trial, and the second trial was when?
The second trial was October 2017.
Okay. And what happened with that trial?
You name it, it happened, right, Ms. Williams?
You name it, it happened, yeah. To really truncate what happened in that trial, the state did appear to make this personal. They went to the depth of hiding witnesses, presenting an individual that we call a jailhouse snitch, if you will. The name was not released to defense counsel. Identity was not released to defense counsel. We filed the proper motions. We argued like hell in front of the court. And essentially, the defense was left with trying to defend against what we didn't know. Obviously, we now know in the end that this individual was just simply a liar who was being presented as an individual that received an alleged confession, when it turns out we did have the ability to pull the housing records of this individual. And it turns out this person was never even in the same building as Mr. Keith Davis Jr. at the same time. My position was not only did the state know that before, but even if they didn't know it, they had the duty to know it. But it's something that's readily available if you look.
Okay. So my understanding, the second trial, the state brought a witness who was part of the Texas cartel.
At the 11th hour.
At the 11th hour.
Yeah,
right?
Literally.
And this was a hitman for the Texas cartel.
That's correct. That's correct.
And he testified in front of the jury that Keith told him he did the murder, correct?
That's correct. That was the testimony.
And based on that, you didn't have anything to refute that, and the jury found Mr. Davis guilty. Correct?
Tomorrow, the jury found Mr. Davis not guilty of first-degree
murder, but guilty of second-degree
murder.
So I think you had 10 days. We filed a brand new motion for new trial.
Correct.
And then you were able to do some research, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, we did some research together.
Absolutely.
We worked on this particular issue together because around this time period, I'm so irate seeing what's going on. I reach out to you, and based on the information that we found out, you put together a motion, correct?
That's correct.
And that motion showed that the man was not only a liar, but he had multiple murder convictions himself, that he had never lived and stayed where he said he had stayed, and that the state had found him and basically had coerced him and given him a better opportunity, correct?
That's correct.
To cut time off his sentence.
That's correct.
Because he was a snitch going around the country telling on people.
He is a professional snitch.
That is correct. And not only did the state know that, but
so Marilyn Mosby knew this.
Well, she is the state. and quite candidly, nothing happens in that office without her sanctioning and without her know-how.
Because they have to pay for this man to come, correct?
Absolutely. And that was the case in this
explain
instance.
to the people, what's the difference? He was charged with first and second degree murder.
Correct.
Why acquit on first and charge on second? And what's the difference between the
I will say this, and one thing that we do talk about sometimes as defense counsel is sometimes unless the jurors come out and speak with you and tell you why they came to their conclusion, that's something really right now I could never know.
Okay.
Considering the presentation that the state gave, it's surprising. How do you acquit on first degree? And convict on second degree, based on the state's version.
Yeah, right.
Based on the state's version. And according to the state's version, someone admitted to this. Right. But so clearly there was something, not just missing, but clearly the jurors felt like this isn't adding up, but we got to do something.
So what compromise? What? Because we got into this, but we never explained what was the situation, the murder, and what that caused the murder. Who was murdered? And why would they pin this on Mr. Davis? So can you explain that background?
Sure. To the degree that I can explain, I pinned it on Mr. Davis. Number one, Mr. Davis did not commit this murder. But what did happen in June of 2015 is Mr. Davis was shot multiple times. Officers have testified in multiple trials under oath that they shot the wrong guy. And when I say they testified that they shot the wrong guy, Officer Eskins testified that the individual that he was chasing is an individual that had locks or braids, and that he shot him, he saw him go down. When Officer Eskins was presented with a photo of Mr. Davis, meaning the person he shot on that day, Officer Eskins testified that I don't describe that man as fitting the description. Not only that, there was a hack driver involved with this alleged robbery that they purport Mr. Davis was fleeing from, if you will. That hack driver had gave a very detailed description of the individual that did not match that of Mr. Davis. Everything from hair, facial features, structure, clothing, hue, body structure, none of it matched that of Mr. Davis. So thus far, what we have is a black man shot by members of the Baltimore City Police Department, and they swung into what I call damage control. And they had a willing participant. They had the state's attorney's office willing to bury a man that survived the shooting.
So who got murdered? Like, he's charged with murder. It had to be somebody's murder. Who got murdered?
At this point, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Jones was shot and killed in the early morning hours at the Pimlico racetrack.
Oh, okay.
Thus far, and of course, what we found out years later.
So, hold on. The same day that Mr. Davis was shot, was that the same day Mr. Jones was shot?
That is correct.
Was it around the same time period?
The allegation is that Mr. Jones was shot about 4:50 in the morning.
Okay.
And then blocks down the road, Mr. Davis, in the same district, if you will.
Yeah.
Mr. Davis was shot about 9 a.m. in the morning. So
no, that's not that close. That's 5 hours.
So they're trying to say that Mr. Davis allegedly shot a man at 4 o'clock in the morning and waited for 5 hours for the police or somebody to come?
Well, I think he jumped in a hack in the intervening time, right?
Exactly.
He shot the guy at the racetrack, jumped in a hack, got into an accident, jumped out, and ran into
a couple blocks
he didn't
down
just
the
jump
street.
out. According to police, he sat there with a gun on his lap, let the police come open the door and say, "Oh, it's the police," and then jump out with the gun.
Yeah. Now, and I will say this, sometimes we laugh to stop from crying.
I was about to say that.
But this is truly disgusting.
Oh, yeah.
Because even a cursory look at the facts would have you pulling out your hair. Anybody that looked at the testimony from all of these officers from the beginning to end points away from Mr. Davis. But there is one thing that they have all had in common, is they have the wrong man shot, and they have to do something about it.
Well, let's go back.
I have one quick question. Can I just ask you? This is Brother Jason. So where are these officers now? Are these officers still out on the street?
Absolutely.
As it stands, they're still terrorizing the members of the community.
Mrs. Mosby, the state's attorney, cleared them, correct?
Well, yes, it's my understanding that she issued a letter to each advising, prior to the investigation being concluded, advising that they would not be prosecuted.
And was there any internal affairs or any civilian review or anything in the process against these officers?
Yeah. Right. So in the very beginning, as defense counsel, we pushed, as the general orders required, that each officer involved in a use of force provide a recorded statement, represented by counsel, of course, while no officer was forced to give a statement in the year of 2015. We pressed and pressed and pressed, and then finally in January of 2016, the officers were compelled to start to give their statements, and one by one they gave statements under oath.
So before we get going, let me interject this. First and foremost, moving forward, we understand that Marilyn Mosby was the state prosecutor during this time. But she was not a prosecutor in any of the trials. She was the overseer. She's what is the state's attorney's office.
Right, yes.
But we don't need to mention her name at all again, because I don't want people thinking this is an Attack Marilyn Mosby show. It's a free Keith Davis show. Yes. And it's about injustice. So we can keep her name out of it. People know she was the state's attorney through all of this, and that she wasn't the actual prosecutor. But
can I just add this? For anyone to misconstrue presenting the actual facts in this case as an attack on Marilyn Mosby is disingenuous.
Yeah,
no, but I'm saying if I keep saying her name over, I know that this is the airways.
This is what people do.
Right. Yeah. And they're going to call Howard, they're going to call Larry, and they're going to say, this was an attack on Marilyn Mosby, da-da-da-da-da. And I can see if you keep saying her name, if, granted, we know she was state prosecutor. I'm just understanding our politics in the show and the station that we're on. Okay. So we understand that. We all get that. But just kind of move forward.
But I will say, it sounds like what you're saying is if the allegation is that this has been going on for so long because the animus has somehow become personal between Marilyn Mosby and Keith Davis, then how do you not say her name?
Well,
she's driving the train.
Because you're right. This initially, there was a discussion. The first time I saw it on social media, there was an argument between you and Mrs. Mosby, correct?
Absolutely.
When
and it wasn't an argument. I had emailed, I had called, I had met, I have done everything I could possibly do. I've gone through every channel to communicate with them as to why this was going on, why was Keith being the one that was criminalized, what was happening with these officers, and eventually I had no other choice but to show up at an event that she was at. And when we were at that event, her body language, when she started to see us, showed me that she knew exactly who I was. She knew exactly why I was there. And she had such her entire tone was just like, how dare you question me? How dare you ask me? And from that moment on, that has continued to be her tone. That has continued to be the fact that I asked her as a public servant, because let's just be very clear. Her job as the state, she is a public servant. She answers, she's account to us. So me going there to ask her seems to have just blown the lid off of an all-out attack on Keith.
And after that conviction, wasn't there a personal tweet that went out?
Exactly. And that's another thing. If you go down the state's attorney's page and you go down to all of the cases where defendants have been convicted, I want you to find one picture with more than one picture of Marilyn Mosby with the victim's family, not tweeting justice, but victory. You will not. Only Keith's.
Is that the tweet that came from the state's attorney?
A year ago tomorrow's, because tomorrow makes a year that he was convicted. Marilyn Mosby, not the state's attorney, but herself, posted a picture of herself with this victim's family, and she tweeted victory. Keith Davis Jr. is convicted of second-degree murder. If that's not personal, I don't know what is.
Well, let me ask you this. After that tweet, you were successful in getting that conviction thrown out because of prosecutorial misconduct,
That's
correct?
correct.
That means the state's attorney's office did something illegal, so the judge threw that out. That happens like once every 10 years. Very, very rare. So that's thrown out. Now we've had 3 trials. Is there another trial?
There's another trial.
So this fourth
April
trial,
2019. We've gone to court every year since 2015.
April 2018.
2019.
No. Was there another trial after the?
Oh yeah, after that.
There's another trial.
Yeah, there was another trial.
And what happened in that trial?
Lord, there's so many. You got to remember. Oh,
that was another hung jury.
Lord, it was another hung jury, and they withheld more evidence and
a videotape
that they claimed that they had for 3 years, that their homicide detective have testified multiple times had no evidentiary value.
So this videotape, they sit down and say that, this video doesn't show anything involving this murder. Is that correct?
Well, I'll just clarify that. Now, while I was not defense counsel in this last trial, I've shifted to civil counsel for Mr. Davis and Mr. Davis's family. But the testimony was that there's a video out here.
Okay.
And the video, it has no evidentiary value. So as a defense counsel, the initial thought that I have is, the video purports to show the victim, Kevin Jones, and someone walking behind Kevin Jones that basically unmasks himself, and this individual is seen. Well, the lead detective in this case has testified that I've seen the video, studied the video, and I don't believe it has any evidentiary value. So what does that mean? That means you also agree that is not Mr. Davis in the video.
Yes.
But more pressing and more disgusting is the fact that the state withheld that video from defense counsel, from any defense counsel, to date.
We don't know what that video is. We don't know if it's been altered. We don't know anything about that video.
So they got a video of the victim right before the murder, and they withheld it?
Absolutely.
So I think his attorney, Mr. Davis's attorney, the different attorney, put the video into evidence and argued to the jurors that it wasn't Mr. Davis and that the real murderer was behind Mr. Jones, correct?
Correct.
But what did the state's attorney say when they put the video into evidence, Kelly?
It said that, but we believe it is Mr. Davis. It's him.
So the state's attorney's office withheld this video for 3 years because they said it didn't show anything. And then the defense introduces the video, and then the prosecutor on the case says that this is Keith Davis in the video?
It's Keith.
So wait.
Same prosecutor in the case.
Same prosecutor.
Wait. This video went from having no evidentiary value to actually featuring the person who's on trial?
That's what they purported to be.
So that's what they said. So that caused a hung jury again, correct?
Yes, another hung jury.
So boom. Now we're here again. It's been hung, and now Mr. Davis is going to, I think, has another new legal team.
Yes.
And because one of the reasons is that once you've done the case once or twice, you don't keep doing his defense. And there's a new trial date when?
April 2019.
So
but that's the issue. This has
April
been a
20th, 2019, Keith Davis will go on trial again.
For a
correct?
fifth time.
For a fifth time.
Did they give him bail?
No, they keep saying that they don't have to give him bail. I mean, when you're not getting bail for second-degree murder in Baltimore City anyway.
But you would think after 3 trials, right, 2 hung juries and all, that they would, because you can, as an attorney, if I'm not mistaken, go before a judge and get another bail hearing.
Trial release. That's correct.
We have. The state argues against it.
Well, but so this is where I'm all messed up, because the response in the community has always been Keith hasn't lost anything because he'd be in jail anyway on the initial charge. But you said now he's doing dead time. He would
Keith
be
has been
out
released
not for
since May of 2018.
There's definitely some misinformation in the community, because until I sat down here, even though I was outraged about the continuing retrials, I always thought, well, even if that conviction wasn't fair, he'd be in jail anyway. You know what I mean? But it turns out that's not even true. He would be home were it not for them continuing to retry.
But he would have gotten parole or been eligible for parole before May of 2018. Most likely, on that 5 without, he has to do 36 months. So you're talking about 36 months from 2015. At the worst, he's home the middle of 2017. So he could have been of his children come to middle of 2017.
Correct.
So my question is
not to mention the suffering that he's doing medically.
Yeah.
Still sitting there with a bullet lodged in his neck.
I mean, as someone that just is a citizen of Baltimore that is clearly not an attorney, but it would seem to me like the state has an awesome power, and that is the power to prosecute. At what point, even though I get, it's not double jeopardy because they're hung juries and it's been thrown out, but I mean, at what, without a citizen even needing to know anything about Keith Davis or this case, at what point does the citizenry say, there's no way, if you have got, if you've got 4 trials, 3 of which are hung, 1 of which was 11-1 slanted towards acquittal, I don't even need to know what happened. You clearly do not have your case. At what point does it really become an abusive process, even if it's not a constitutional violation? I mean, at what point does an elected official have to say, look, in my heart, I still believe he did it, but I can't prove it.
Are you asking how much thousands of dollars shall the state spend to continue?
They wasted $250,000, maybe almost $500,000, if not $1 million.
If you listen to Marilyn, she will say, and she has said in conversations, well, he's a murderer. He's a murderer. He's a murderer.
And actually, he is innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. No, I agree. But what I'm saying is,
and that's sad. You got the prosecutor saying that.
Well, even if you believe that, at what point do you say, clearly I don't have the evidence to prove it, even if I do think he's a murderer?
And that's why I think Kelly believes this is personal.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Keith has been before 6 jurors. What makes you think that you know better than his peers? Before 60 jurors. Excuse me. So clearly the people are saying there's doubt here. We don't think that this is what's happening. Instead, we just keep doing this over and over again.
Finally, the last question I want to ask you, there was a investigation by an independent group of individuals, correct, in reference to officers. Could you tell us a little bit about that? June
23rd, 2015, I went to a forum, and there was the Civilian Review Board. And like I said, back then, I just needed some resolve. I needed some answers to figure out what to do or how to help. So I put in a complaint with the Civilian Review Board, and it was notarized. And I guess that jump-started a investigation. It was a 2-year investigation into the excessive force claims against Keith. That investigation yielded a result in April of 2018. And the Civilian Review Board did something unprecedented, is that they asked for the termination suspension of 2 officers. They asked for an immediate reprimand and suspension of 30 days of the other 2 officers. Their findings said that they don't believe that Keith ever had a gun. They also said that officers did not try to de-escalate the situation, that they just kind of went firing without any type of anything. They also said that something that was very, very clear and that we know from their testimony, but that the statements that they give to Internal Affairs, they differed. They basically weren't truthful. They weren't honest.
Okay. And I want people to realize that's 40 shots.
44.
44 bullets that were laid for one individual is outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, he's lucky to be alive.
Every day.
As are the other 2 civilians that ran out of that garage.
Well, is there even an allegation that he fired back?
It was initially.
Initially, when the officers were trying to get their story together, but the firearms examiner for the Baltimore City Police Department concluded that there is no evidence that that handgun was ever fired. And on cross-examination,
the same handgun that was allegedly used in the murder.
The same gun that's allegedly used in the murder
was never fired.
James Wagster testified in 2 trials that that gun was never fired. I have the transcript.
Ever there or ever in life?
Well, he can't say ever in life. The question was this handgun fired on this day?
Oh, so at that day. So that means if it was used in a murder, how was it used in a murder if it wasn't fired?
It would have to be militarily grade cleaned in order to show no...
But here's
we're talking about 5 hours later.
Here's the reality of the testimony. Wagster testified that not only did he look like at the shell casings, but he looked down the barrel of the gun. He tests for gunshot residue and all the things that examiners test for to determine whether or not a firearm was in fact fired. Excuse me. The state had an opportunity to cross-examine and say as a caveat. And the state left it at that because the state knew that this has always been the conclusion from the firearms examiner, James Wagster from the Baltimore Police Department. This handgun was not fired on that day, period. I have the transcript. I've always had it available to anyone that needed to see. Andrea Mason had the transcript. His testimony has never changed. In fact, that's probably why James Wagster was not called ever again. Because his testimony was this handgun was not fired.
Where was the gun found in relation to him being shot? Like, did he have it in his hand?
Absolutely
or was it
not.
Somewhere else in the garage?
There was never an allegation that this handgun was in Keith Davis's hand. The allegation was that there was a handgun recovered from on top of a refrigerator in this mechanic's garage that Keith Davis ducked into when he was dodging bullets himself.
I mean, it's outrageous that there are 44 bullets fired at this man, and they're not even alleging that he had a gun at that time or was firing at them. Why were there 44 bullets anyway? I mean, what do you...
Remember, they were cleared. They were cleared by one organization, the state's attorney's office, but then the Civilian Review Board, they said we need to fire 2 of these officers who are still working, and the other 2 need to be suspended. So, Kelly, where do we go from here?
We obviously are going back to trial again.
So that's the question. Who's paying for defense counsel?
Well,
I mean, I know we're paying for all these trials
I was about to say,
as a citizen.
Well,
but this has to be hard on you and the family because this ain't free and it ain't cheap.
Here's the good
I know
thing.
she ain't cheap.
Here's
You're too good to be.
But she's worth every penny.
Absolutely. I told you that was our defense counsel 2 years ago.
The good thing about this is that people are so angry at the audacity and the insult on their intelligence as to want to be so strong. And in fact, the last trial that we had, the public put up every dime for his entire defense. And going on since we started, the public has paid for his defense fees.
And I guess that would be one of my questions as well, is how can the community help you and help Keith Davis?
Well, our community is kind of, I mean, it's so much I hear, I'm so sorry about your situation, but, I like this person or I like that. And, you just have to acknowledge that this is going on.
Visibility.
And yes, you have to understand, bring up Freddie Gray and people with that. I truly believe that had Freddie Gray survived that day, this is what would be happening with him. He would be going through multiple trials. He would be criminalized. So what people in our community, when I say our community, our black community, is to start to hold your elected officials accountable. Because at the end of the day, this is a complete abuse of process and power. And he is a black man. And it is, because so many times you hear this, people are for us and officials are for us. And that's why you be capping with the Dems. You know, I can't. You know, don't
let Hassan get you in a bag of chips.
We can get in it. We can get in
it. Story. Not today, sake.
But you know, you got to hold your elected officials accountable, and I feel like so many times we attack the police department and we are outraged. The selective outrage has to stop. We need to be outraged enough to say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I see. Like Mark, remember when I met you, you were Mosby Land, and you still are Mosby Land, but he was willing to be like, hey, look, I don't care. I don't know what happened, but you need to let him go. So I think that we need to hold these elected officials accountable. You need to educate yourself on this process. And again, that was always my goal, is to not only bring Keith home, but to also educate people so that no one else goes through this. So I think that we just have to be able to hold individuals accountable.
So we had a good question on Twitter, on Facebook Live, that says, from Shane Bryan, can there be a civil case started against the state for harassment or false prosecution?
I think she said she's.
And I was going to say, I understand now that you're now the civil attorney. So can you tell us about that?
The short answer is yes. I mean, typically as civil counsel, a lot of times we like to wait for the criminal proceedings to wrap up. We bring any and all claims that we may have against any and all persons that may be liable, not just for the malicious prosecution and abusive process, but of course the excessive force, the use of force, the shooting of Mr. Davis. And so the short answer is yes, a civil action can commence, but I would prefer to wait until the criminal matter is wrapped up so that we can bring the abusive process, malicious prosecution, all the things that have unfortunately hit Mr. Davis and his family since 2015.
And then a civil trial, the findings of the Civilian Review Board would they be helpful? Or
they're relevant because the Civilian Review Board, it's my understanding, their conclusion was based on the testimony and based on the evidence. And so most of the witnesses, if not all the witnesses that are relevant to the criminal matter would be relevant to the civil.
So I want to just say there's a reason why we brought you in here. Like, I've tore myself up for a long time. I've never known the facts of this case. So I couldn't write about it the way people asked me to, because I really didn't. I don't think most people, until you just explained exactly what has happened from point A to point B, there's so much misinformation out there. And that's why we're going to keep looping this on DMVDaily.news so people can get a clear understanding. I want to say, when you talk about definition of a ride or die, my girl's listening. I'm telling you, that's the ultimate.
No, I'm not a ride or die. Where we riding to while we gotta die? But
we ain't gotta die.
I understand this. I got questions. If there was any doubt in my mind, I would be the first one. Like, you don't call me anymore. So no, I'm not. You
just standing up for
listened to
truth and justice.
Shot. I listened. I was on the phone. I listened to the bullets rain down. I sat in a hospital outside of a door for a week as he learned how to speak again, as he learned how to drink again. So there's no way that I would and I could leave him in this. And, he's been convicted. We've been here. I'm going to continue to do this until my husband crosses this threshold.
Well, if y'all, set up a GoFundMe or whatever, because look, you still got commissary wise over there. You still got medical bills, like you said. He still got a bullet.
I on the phone?
Oh, I'm sure.
And so I'm wondering
if you got
whether or
something,
not
we'll put it up on DMV Daily. Yes. We'll share it on our.
Somebody in the process.
We have wrote to the governor. We have reached out to the gubernatorial candidates, both Mr. Jealous, Hogan. The only candidate that has voiced concern and that has spoke about Keith was the Green Party candidates. The other candidates declined to speak to anyone in regard to Keith.
Oh, I know Andy happy. He looking too.
He started.
I know he happy about that.
Let's be clear here, though. The governor does not have any power, even if he wanted
That's not
to
true, because
in.
we sent a letter to Mayor Pugh, and even though I even have my issues with her sometimes, she was the only elected official that responded and said, you know what, I am so sorry that this is happening, but the state's attorney's office is governed by the governor. So the person that you would need to reach out to would be Larry Hogan, and she also gave his address.
But like, could the governor actually force her to drop the case? Because I don't think that's true.
No, but I'm sure they can overturn the conviction or something like that.
Office, but I mean, you know,
well, remember, the city council has the ability to say, well, your budget, you've wasted $1 million going after one person, and you want to take your budget from $36 million to $44 million. Let's sit down and talk about this. So maybe we have Christopher Burnett tomorrow. Maybe we can sit down and talk to all the members of the city council to see what they think.
I don't.
You just set the boy. He's like, I ain't going in that shit.
You're trying to get the city council to defund the state's attorney's office in the midst of a crime wave. Good luck to you.
And a year and a half before they got to run for office.
Yeah.
No, they can't defund them, but they can maybe ask where the money's going.
Good question.
Well, close us out.
Today we had an amazing program. We didn't take any calls, but this is something we felt the community needed to know the whole story from the start to the finish. I'm so glad that I was here today with Kelly Davis, the wife of Keith Davis, and the amazing Latoya Francis Williams.
Yeah.
I'm here with my guys right here, Mr. Politics himself, Hassan, who's here, as well as the boss of all bosses, Mark. So,
what am I, chicken liver?
Oh, I forgot my man Jason. I can't forget the man that puts it all together.
Don't hold it against
Jason. In the back. So, I just want to say thank you, and the big message, hopefully everybody learned, whether you agree or you don't agree, but you actually learned a little more about the criminal justice process. And in closing,
get registered to vote. You got till 9 o'clock tonight. Get registered. Make sure you do.
Got till 9 o'clock.
That's right, because you can still register during early vote. Okay. All right. We want to let you know that this show was brought to you by those political strategists, Politicom Strategic Solutions, successfully helping candidates get elected as long as they're registered to vote since the 1970s. Make sure that you contact them today, 240-242-7505. And again, tomorrow, talk about Question H, and we're going to bring this issue up as well.
And also, this show was bought by that amazing legal team, Bates and Garcia. Today, Tony Garcia beat the state in a trial in 1 hour and 4 minutes. It was so funny, I had to run out and come back here. But most of all, I want to say thank you, God bless, and free Keith Davis.
Free Keith Davis.
Free Keith Davis.
Free Keith Davis.
Thank you.
The new 1010 WOLB with talk in the day and soul at night.
This check on traffic is sponsored by the T.J. Martell Foundation. The T.J. Martell Foundation, music's promise for a cure. To learn more, visit tjmartell.org. That's tjmartell.org. Lots of heavy volume on the inner loop of the Beltway west side, starting from 95, stretching all the way up to Security Boulevard. Meanwhile, slow through Towson on the inner loop. Delays begin from just after Green Spring Avenue as you head out to Perrine Parkway. And delays off and on the BW Parkway heading north out of Laurel from 198 to Route 100. This weather update is sponsored by the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation invites you to take steps for cures at a walk event near you. Get started at CC. Take steps